my name is Adele Phillips, and I'm joined today by Kevin Cotter from NEMA. And we've got a lot of ground to cover in this presentation. So we'll try to get moving here quickly. So our agenda today, we're going to go through our welcome and introductions, share a little bit about ourselves, and also we got a poll question to learn a little bit about you. I'm going to review a bunch of flood mitigation things you can do and resources that are out there. I'll be going through the information pretty quick. You did receive or will be receiving a PDF with a bunch of links to these resources, and we can also include them in the chat. Then resources, that's regarding financial resources. I've got a section on grants that are beyond what NEMA and DNR administers, things you can think about when you're trying to piece together funding for these projects. We've got some tips on how to make a compelling grant application. And then Kevin's going to be presenting about NEMA's administration of various disaster assistance money, as well as their own administration of these FEMA grants for flood mitigation. All right, so moving on to introductions. My name is Adele, and I work in the floodplain management section at Department of Natural Resources. My background is land use planning and architecture. I do project development reviews for our department, and I advise on permitting procedures. I also review hazard mitigation plans, and I developed our 2022 State of Nebraska Flood Hazard Mitigation Plan. And I'm a past grant writer, and I also kind of review grant applications. And yeah, with that, I'll pass it to Kevin. Do you mind saying a couple words about your work at NEMA?
How you doing? I'm Kevin Cotter. I'm a program specialist with the hazard mitigation unit at NEMA. Primarily, I do a lot of grant management, a lot of application development throughout the different mitigation activities. And yeah, I've been at NEMA now for almost 10 months.
So let's talk about flood risk. And so there's natural hazards, and today's we're talking about flood hazard content, just FYI. So floodplains are inherently hazardous places. Flooding itself is the most frequently reported hazard in Nebraska, followed by drought. In a 30-year mortgage, a structure in a floodplain has a better than 1 in 4 chance of experiencing flooding. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when is this structure going to experience flooding. I know it may feel like a hypothetical to a lot of folks, or they'll because we use terminology like 100-year floodplain, they'll think, well, we just had a flood in the last 10 years, so we're good for 90 years, right? It's really, that's not how it works. You've got a 1% chance every year, and that accumulates to a 26% chance within a 30-year period. So odds are good you're going to experience a flood. In addition to that, our climate models are showing that our springs, Nebraska springs are getting wetter, as well as our winters. Our summers are getting drier, but when we do have the precipitation, it's increasing in frequency. So we're having more storm events, and those storm events are increasing in scale and intensity. That refers to the scope, the footprint of the storm, as well as the amount of rain or precipitation falling in a time period. They're also decreasing in predictability. So our ability to warn people of these hazardous conditions is going to struggle to keep up with predictability. Like we're developing a lot of tools, but it's going to be harder for us to have accurate predictions about the weather or these storms that are coming. Already we've seen that the precipitation in Nebraska during heaviest storm events has increased 16%. That's measured between 1958 to 2012 specifically. We've already seen an increase, and that increase in precipitation is going to continue. Moving on, flood risk reduction. So we have this flood risk, we have this increasing precipitation. What we need to do to protect ourselves is flood risk reduction. And when we do these activities, we safeguard our property, we improve our quality of life in our communities, we preserve natural floodplain functions, that ability of a floodplain to hold slow and hold flood water or surface water runoff during a storm event. Our flood insurance costs go down, our local economy benefits. For every $7, for every $1 spent on flood mitigation, we actually save $7 in loss and repair. And those $7, that recirculates in your local economy. Every dollar in a community generally circulates 3 times. So there's a lot of economic benefit to be had by reducing your community's exposure to flood risk. And all these things together, they improve your community's resilience. A community's resilience is it's like its ability to bounce back from events. You can weather these storms that are going to happen a lot better because you've got that I don't want to use the word resiliency, but you've got the economic health, the social health, and the natural health of your community in place. This is a screen clip from a housing and urban development resource that I'll share with you later. It's just a diagram of a community and describing various hazards. Things that are related to our conversation today are obviously the inland flooding, but you also see erosion noted, drought, wildfire, extreme heat. These are all very present in Nebraska, and they are interrelated. Their solutions are also interrelated. This phase of the diagram now shows mitigation actions that can be taken. And when you implement these mitigation actions, like the bank stabilization or vegetative buffers, setback limits, these things can help reduce your vulnerability to other hazards. When we have vegetative buffers, we reduce our erosion problems, for example, and we maintain our topsoil, and we have, better crops. We're not losing the nutrients, that organic matter from our fields because it's washing downstream, and because we aren't having sedimentation in our streams, we're not experiencing flooding, like channels filling up and having issues in our drainage systems that cause flooding. So there's a lot of interconnectedness, and when you think about flood mitigation, we have to encourage you to think in a synergistic manner where you've got to connect different dots. It's not always a very linear. It's a web or a net, I guess, might be a way to think about it. When we think of these mitigation actions, you could loosely group them into 4 families. And so those families here are in these raindrops. Foremost, you want to think about natural system protection. What can we do to help that floodplain act like a floodplain? It's slowing, sequestering water. It's a sponge. How do we help it act like a sponge? We can do this through wetland protections and having grassed waterways in our fields, doing erosion and sediment control on building sites. Whenever you see the straw wattle along a roadway or even on a large scale grading project, having that wattle in place keeps the soil and water from flowing off of that site quickly. Rainwater catchment basins. There's all kinds of things we can do to preserve a natural system. Local plans and regulations are another category. These are our zoning ordinances. If your community has a stormwater management plan, that factors into regulations. Any open space protection, maybe you've got development restrictions to ensure that structures don't encroach on some open space, and ensure that open space has the capacity to accept or receive those floodwaters and protect other downstream areas from increased flooding or flood threat. Education and awareness. This is what we do with our outreach, sending annual mailers to residents within floodplains, having educational events, working with your emergency services to ensure there's awareness of how they would be notified of a flood coming, where people should go in case of flood, just making sure that folks who are in the floodplain know what to do and where to go. Then this last group is structure and infrastructure. That's structural things would be acquiring and removing structures from the floodplain, opening that floodplain back up so it can serve its purpose. Elevating structures so that they can't be inundated. There's still an obstruction in the floodplain, but at least they aren't subject to floodwater damage like they would otherwise be. Floodproofing structures, putting backflow preventers in the pipes leading to a house that keeps water from flowing back through utilities into a home and causing damage when the system is overwhelmed. And it's also protecting your critical facilities, your schools, your clinics, hospitals, nursing homes, that sort of thing. So there's a myriad different activities that you can implement to mitigate for flooding. What we like to encourage is that you take a holistic watershed approach. This diagram it's the Strahler, I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but the Strahler stream order. It's representative of a watershed in that these segments with the ones, those are our small tributaries and waterways. The 3s and 4s are our rivers. So everything accumulates, right? When thinking about these mitigation measures, so think about what you can do in those tributaries and waterways where the number 1s are. Those can be intermittent or seasonal drainages in our fields, or roadside ditches, making sure those are vegetated, those aren't being encroached upon. Make sure those things are capturing rainwater and flowing it there, so that when you're down on a river at the number 4 segments, you're at the end of the line. There's only so much you can do downstream in the watershed to prevent flooding. The most effective thing you can do is capture and sequester rainwater where it lands upstream in your watershed. So again, the message is capture rain where it lands. It's the most cost-effective thing you can do when you're thinking about mitigation measures. As described before, grass waterways, this is a before and after of a field where you can see in the image on the left, they've got an erosion problem. They've worked with NRCS, they've put in a grass waterway. Now they're keeping their soil in place. They're not sending that sediment into the jurisdiction's ditches or downstream into the neighboring towns' waterways and causing the neighboring town to have to dredge and try to figure things out. But when the water is slowed upstream, it saves a lot of headaches. Here's another small scale intervention. On the left, we've got a picture of a little rainwater garden that a person has installed in their home. Rainwater is coming off the roof. It's going through this rock channel. It's getting sequestered and slowed before it ever gets into the stormwater system for the community. Similarly, on the right, we've got a median between two paved roadways. The water is being shunted off the roadway into this bioswale. The bioswale is filtering and slowing and sequestering that rainwater. When it rains, our roads act like streams, okay? So think about them as an extension of your watershed and the network of tributaries that comprises it. Some communities, by the way, City of Lincoln is one of them. They offer grants to homeowners to install rain gardens. That's a project your jurisdiction might want to consider. Buyouts and relocation. This is, I think this gets talked about a lot. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's no easy thing to remove structures and possibly encourage people to relocate. I mean, this is a very difficult process, but it's something that can be done. This is an example from Beatrice, Nebraska, where since the 70s, they have been strategically removing structures from the floodplain and opening that floodplain back up. And they found that they've been able to protect themselves from incurring greater damages. We have this described in a story map that's very thorough. It's a fabulous tool. You can access it online. So over this course of time, since 1973, they've actually removed about 120 properties, and those spaces that have been opened up have been converted into recreational spaces. It's not just open area, but there's ball fields now, there's skate parks, there's playgrounds, there's bike trails. So it's still an active, these are great assets to the community, but we no longer have people living in hazardous conditions. And it's allowing the Blue River to expand when it needs to without risk to folks' lives and livelihoods. Our stats are a little old. We've had flooding since then, but in 2015, that was at that time the third largest flood in the community's history, and they've estimated that they saved nearly $13 million in flood damage. Like they avoided incurring $13 million in flood damage because these structures have been removed. So, and it was not just because the structures were removed and those structures didn't receive damage, but those structures being there did not augment the flood and cause damage elsewhere. So the scope of the flooding was reduced overall and was less damaging. All right, planning resources. We've got a lot of guides out there. Here's some good ones nationally and state level. The first one is this nature-based solutions guide. It's got all kinds of examples on how you can use green infrastructure or habitat-driven approaches to reducing your flood risk. We've also got the Nebraska's Comprehensive Plan and Flood Risk resource guide here. It helps you understand how you incorporate flood risk planning into your existing planning instruments and these long-range visions for safeguarding your community and guiding development in your community. Another one here, this is the HUD Community Resilience Toolkit, and that's where those earlier diagrams came from. right out of this guide. So how, planning allows you to make broad brushstrokes within your jurisdiction, and it's allows you to take consistent action over many years. If you adopt a stream buffer, that buffer requirement is in place. Every parcel, as it gets developed, will be subject to that buffer. I mean, if it's in that overlay, but anyway, and incrementally over years, you will see that you have preserved that stream from encroachment and from development, and hopefully maintain the habitat around it. And you will see that downstream, you are not experiencing the flood effects. So getting these instruments in place, having that long range vision allows you to consistently pursue your objective. These instruments also are fodder, or they're not fodder, but they're important supporting documents for any grants that you pursue to fund your mitigation activities. This is the basis for your compelling arguments. It demonstrates that your community has political will, like consistent political will towards supporting flood hazard mitigation. That's very important to demonstrate to a potential funder. They don't want their money to go to a jurisdiction that only has a passing interest or a passing goal to reduce flood risk. So here we have the state flood hazard mitigation plan. This was just released in 2022. It has heaps of data for your communities to use. It is aggregated at the county level, which works pretty well for your local hazard mitigation plans, which are generally at the county level. Items or chapters you want to be aware of and review in this document. Chapter 3 is the risk assessment. That's where we've crunched a bunch of numbers to describe what's at risk for flooding in your community in terms of acres, miles of roadway, numbers of culverts and bridges, values of agricultural crops, livestock, values of structure. We've got the data there, and you can see how your jurisdiction, or at least your county, compares to other counties across the state in terms of risk. Then in chapter 4, we describe a whole slew of mitigation strategies that you can pursue to reduce the types of flood risks that are, or protect the types of assets that are at risk of flooding within your jurisdiction. And then in chapter 5, we go through a whole bunch of funding instruments that are available to fund your mitigation projects. In the appendices, we've got tables and tables of data. We describe your exposure to riverine flood risk, your exposure to dam failure flood risk, and levee failure flood risk. Wherever we had the data available, the flood risk or inundation data available electronically, we have crunched those numbers, and we have it in tabular format for you, and there'll be a slide coming. And then at the very end, we have mitigation action project sheets. We've made a selection of about 10 mitigation actions, and we discuss how to go about implementing them, what to consider financially and in terms of maintenance of these projects. They are fact sheets that you can take to other local officials or community leaders to talk about these mitigation ideas. So this slide has some excerpts. This figure on the left is an example of a map from the plan that it's annualized frequency of riverine flooding by county. Annualized frequency means what's the likelihood your county is going to encounter a flood in a given year. Each of these, we've got it colored by range, but at the end of the state flood hazard mitigation, you can actually see what your rate is, what your frequency is, your frequency number. So 2.58, that means they will experience annually 2.58 floods. So I don't know what 0.58 floods look like, but anyway, it gives you an idea where you've had these events over time broken down into a annual number. Then we've got a screenshot of the flood mitigation strategies practice action sheets. That's a cover page, and then we've got a table that kind of compares which ones are best for rural or urban applications, which ones are low maintenance versus high maintenance, which ones are low cost versus high cost. So you've got an idea what might be applicable to your jurisdiction. And then the data tables that I mentioned earlier, this is just a clip, alphabetical by county. The type of asset is listed across the top, and then the unit, miles, acres, number, dollar value, etc. So this is a clip from the beginning of our table of assets at risk of riverine flooding. So there's 3 tables again: riverine, levee failure, and dam failure. In one of the earlier guides that I pointed out, the Community Resilience Toolkit, they've also got great pages of mitigation actions. I've clipped a picture of one of their flood mitigation pages, as well as drought mitigation. Drought is also a major hazard here. The mitigation actions for one also support the mitigation of the other. So when you are helping the land's capacity to sequester rainfall, you are also protecting from drought. When you are sequestering water, when you're detaining it, you are protecting your community from drought. So think about those co-benefits that you can have from mitigating for flood. Okay, moving on, financial resources. There's different things you can pursue. It's not just grants. You can have a local bond initiative. You can look at revolving loan funds from the state government or other entities. There's government grants, which we'll go into more detail. Private foundations. There's a lot of foundation money out there in the state of Nebraska. You may have a foundation active locally that's interested in just supporting things in your area. There's also more like statewide or federally active or nationally active foundations as well. But look into those private financial sources. You can also get loans. You can also develop a local or a regional fee program. Development happens, they pay a fee. For those impacts, those impact fees go to pay for mitigation. Maybe they are used as match for mitigation grants. There's a variety of instruments out there. And then public-private partnerships. Perhaps there is a corporation that wants to ensure there's safe housing for its workforce, or that its business remains viable in that area. Part of protecting its business interest may be reducing its flood risk. So there are companies out there that are willing to work with communities to ensure a good home for both. So be open-minded. There's a lot of ways to piece resources together out there. It's not easy, but it can be done. It takes conversations. It takes some out-of-the-box thinking. So grant sources. There's a few federal ones here right out the gate that our 2 agencies, NEMA and DNR, are active in. That's the Hazard Mitigation Grant Programs, BRIC and FMA. The first 2 here are administered through NEMA, and Kevin will talk more about that. And then the Department of Natural Resources administers the Flood Mitigation Assistance Grant. That can support mitigation planning activities and property buyouts. There's also something called real-time technical assistance. that our division can do. We can help do some simple engineering to identify, if X activity is taken in your jurisdiction, like maybe it's some adjustment to a bridge or culvert, or maybe some retention or detention structure is put in place in your floodplain, we can model how the flooding can be reduced in your community. So we can do some basic engineering design exercises to explore options for you. Also, please note that on these grants, these FEMA grants, your community, your NFIP community must be in good standing with the NFIP. So you don't want to have development violations out there, or have what an open community assistance visit with our team out there, because it can affect your standing in the NFIP program. But moving on, the Land and Water Conservation Fund, this is from the National Park Service. It can be pursued through Nebraska's Game and Parks Commission. It supports creation of parks and other outdoor recreational facilities. Nebraska has a Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund. This is administered through the Department of Environment and Energy, and it supports wastewater treatment facilities most commonly, and sanitary sewer collection systems, but it can do a lot more than that. So reach out to DEE about this revolving loan fund. USDA NRCS has so many programs. I mean, I don't know how they keep track of all of them, but it has a host of programs and resources available. The best person to talk to is your district conservationist. A couple of notable programs are the EQIP program. That is something that helps private landowners maintain stream bank stability. So if you've got an erosion problem, they want to strengthen a stream bank, pursue EQIP funds. There's also the WFPO, the Watershed and Flood Prevention Operations Program. This helps local governments restore watersheds. The watershed is up to 250,000 acres in the area, so you got some space to work with. But it's to take that holistic view of a watershed and restore it. There's also community development block grants, CDBG, through HUD. Our local HUD office is in Omaha. Contact them to explore the different kinds of funds available through HUD. They are very flexible. You can use HUD money, you can use CDBG money as match for other federal grants. That's not typical. Usually the matching has to be from some non-federal source, but CDBG grants can be used that way. One important thing to note is that you must demonstrate that low and moderate income residents will benefit from your project, which actually a lot of our communities qualify for. So do consider that. USDA Rural Development has two programs that can help with mitigation. There's a community facilities grant, and there's also a water and environment program. Then I've listed 3 Nebraska foundations, well, not Nebraska, the NFWF, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, that's nationally active. And then we also have, and it promotes habitat restoration of natural systems, okay? Nebraska Environmental Trust, and then the Nebraska Community Foundation. Reach out to them, start a conversation, find out what kind of projects they're interested in. And then there's also a link that's going to be shared. There's transportation grants out there. There's so many transportation grants out there. So if part of your open space project involves a hike bike trail, get one of these active transportation grants. Like, you're not going to, I guess, don't have blinders on where you're only looking for flood mitigation money when actually part of your flood mitigation is creating, this asset for your community that people can enjoy nature in. So you might, it might be a hike bike trail that you need to pursue. There's a Rails to Trails page that has a list of many transportation grants that are out there. Okay, moving on. And I've just got a few more slides and then I'll be done. Tips, form partnerships. You want to be in conversation with other stakeholders and you want to be leveraging one another's assets. It could be knowledge, it could be bookkeeping capacity, project management capacity, whatever it is, just form those partnerships. Start small. You may have a big picture, but you know, identify those initial steps, successfully implement them. You know, even if it's just a $25,000 grant or a $50,000 grant, that's something. That's a beginning, and you can implement that. You can demonstrate that are successfully implemented. You can leverage that in future grant applications. Start small and don't be afraid to break things down into little pieces and pursue them that way. Research the grant. Before you do anything, make sure you're eligible. Make sure your partner is an eligible applicant if you're not an eligible entity. Make sure you know the funder's interests and objectives. I mean, if your project does not fall within something they care about, you're wasting both their time and yours. Tell the story of your community. It's, you know, talk about what's important, talk about why this project matters. And oh, thanks. Thanks for sharing that link. Is it Ted? Tony, thank you. And then demonstrate prior success. Talk about those actions that you've done that have been successful, those previous times you've worked with these partners, those other projects that you've built. And I want to, I guess, just tell the story of your community, caveat this. These are BRIC grant specific tips now in these next 2 slides. BRIC is about scoring points. It's not about telling an endearing story. It's about scoring points. You need to score technical and qualitative points. And there's technical criteria. You need to score 100% of those. You just assume that everybody else has also scored 100% of the technical criteria points. Where you need to be competitive, or where the competition exists, is within the qualitative criteria. There's 6 qualitative criteria. I didn't include them in the slides, but it's a scale that you get scored against. A reviewer reads your application material, and they decide whether you minimally, mostly, entirely, or exceeded meeting that criteria. If you didn't mention something at all, you get 0 points. If you exceeded, you know, you thoroughly responded to that criteria, you provided plenty of supporting documentation, then you will exceed, and you will be able to get the maximum points for that. So for each of the 6 criteria, they're scored in this scale. Okay. You need to demonstrate that there are direct risk reduction results from your proposed activity. You also want to show that not only does your project address or reduce the risk A, but that it also benefits or reduces risk for risk B or risk C. There's you know, cascading effects of hazards, and hopefully your proposal addresses those as well. Leverage partnerships, show that you're working with folks, show that you have been and will be working with others. Demonstrate that prior success. Note contingencies and hurdles. I think a lot of people shy away from this because they don't want to show any weakness. But if you show that you have identified some potential gaps or some obstacles, you've thought about what you will do, you've built into your time frame some wiggle room for project delays, discuss that in your proposal. The reviewers want to see that you are fully conceiving this project. You need to include your staff credentials. Who is going to be doing what work? put names in there, put biographies, talk about previous projects that they have led. This stuff matters. It will get you points. Capitalize key terminology. So the reviewers of these grant applications, they just see a big block of text on their screen. They don't see any paragraph breaks. There's no formatting available to them. You need to make sure that these key scoring concepts are jumping out at them so they can find that information that demonstrates that you are considering climate change or future conditions. Capitalize climate change, capitalize future conditions in your response. That will help their eyes find the appropriate content in your project application. Maximize attachments. So in the grant application interface and the interface that the reviewer sees, again, it's all text, but in the attachments, you can include maps, photographs, diagrams, charts. You can append visual content that supports your argument, as well as you can append the meaty parts of those long-range planning instruments that demonstrate that your jurisdiction is committed to reducing this risk and committed to putting up a certain amount of financial support. No fluff. Don't waste the reviewer's time. Don't repeat anything more than necessary. Make sure that your writing is concise. And then after it's all said and done, even if your project's not successful, ask for the reviewer comments. If you've got you submitted a BRIC application, you didn't get, you weren't selected, ask NEMA, can then get those reviewer comments from FEMA. That will help. The reviewers are required to provide justification for the scores that they gave. So, and FEMA will make those available. But ask for that information, use it to build up a stronger proposal next time around. It doesn't look like this is loading very slowly. Let's see. Okay. What I've done here is a key element is what's used as a scoring criterion. So implementation measures is one of the qualitative criteria that you want to score points in. You're able to score up to 15 points on this criteria. The reviewers have prompts. They have these questions that they see. What potential implementation challenges and obstacles are identified? What pre and post implementation monitoring strategies? You have access to this information too. When you write your narrative, key in to these key terms: monitoring, technical managerial staff, labor standards. Capitalize those in your narrative. Speak to those items directly. That's what gets you the full points. Even if it's one sentence about labor standards, that's still helping you get the full points on this category. You may feel like you're just paying lip service to it, but that's what you need to do to get points.
All right, so I'm just going to go over some of the activities and resources that you can access through the hazard mitigation unit here at NEMA. This is just an overview of some of the grants we currently have open. Most of them are the result of disaster declarations with DR 4420 on down. We also have 3 open grants through BRIC, and in total, all grants combined, it's estimated around $67 million. We're still waiting to hear back on BRIC 2022 to get a more accurate number. All right, so we're anticipating that FEMA's gonna release the 2023 notice of funding sometime around early August. And then the application window is going to open up again in September. Currently, BRIC 2022 applications are still under FEMA review. BRIC 2021 projects are being awarded, and some of those have already been implemented. BRIC 2020 projects are also in progress. We're identifying potential mitigation projects now. And the big thing is we're always accepting NOIs. So even if we don't have a funding opportunity open currently, we never really know ahead of how much they're eventually going to open up again. So if we have the NOI on file, we can better get your application process going. And if it's a NOI for BRIC, just make note of that, and we'll put it aside for September when the application window starts. NEMA and DNR will work together to develop, review, and submit the BRIC and FMA applications for Nebraska.
We help put your project in the correct bucket, if that helps you guys.
Yes, please. Mitigation planning. We have 21 mitigation plans in the state, and most are housed within the NRDs. The real important aspect of this is that participation is required to receive any HMA funding. So different funding opportunities. The HMGP, the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, it becomes eligible after a federally declared disaster. And although we initially prioritize the impacted areas, oftentimes it is open to the entire state, and this is managed by the Hazard Mitigation Unit at NEMA. BRIC is an annual funding opportunity. It sets 6% set aside from all federally declared disasters in the previous year. And this will be in two categories: the state allocated and then the nationwide competition. If it does any of the projects over $1 million does automatically go into the nationwide competition. And this is also managed by the Hazard Mitigation Unit. And then finally, flood mitigation assistance is a yearly appropriation from Congress. And as Adele has said, NFIP is required, and this is managed by DNR. All right, so how to apply? Notice of funding opportunities will be posted as they come available. And it will a lot of the specifics, specifically, if we're prioritizing the impacted area first, and the grant timelines will all be included with that. And if you're interested, you can just go to the NEMA website and fill out a notice of interest, and then just send it to the NEMA Hazard Mitigation email. And then we keep the NOIs on file, but for BRIC, there is an extra step where when we start going over the applications, we sit down with the governor's task force, and we pick which ones to prioritize. And if prioritized, then the NOI will move into the application phase. Just some upcoming events. The Hazard Mitigation Unit's always looking for opportunities to talk with local entities and just give you all a better idea of some of the opportunities we have available. Yeah, please pass our contact info to any of the groups, any school districts, planning committees, roads department, and we can see what we can help out with. Additionally, we offer G393. It's a mitigation for emergency managers, and we'll go out and teach how to perform mitigation activities to reduce or eliminate long-term risks. And it's also a good opportunity just to talk more specifics and see what ideas we can come up with for your community. You can request this course through your PET region or the NEMA training team. And we're also offering one in Buffalo County, June 27th through the 29th. And then this is just the point of contacts for the whole Hazard Mitigation Unit.
Are there any questions for Kevin on any of this information? I'll propose one. Can, do you accept NOIs anytime, or do you prefer to receive them during a certain window?
Nope, we receive them anytime. We keep them on file. And then when opportunities for funding arise, we go through them and we'll reach out to you if we can fit your project in.
Okay, and Mary, Kevin, we get a lot of calls about outdoor warning sirens and emergency backup generators. Is this something that hazard mitigation grant can cover?
Yep, absolutely. If you just want to submit a NOI, when we have a funding opportunity, that's definitely something we can do.
Hearing no questions and seeing no questions, I think we'll conclude this training, and I thank everyone for your time. Sorry we went a few minutes over, but if you have any questions, just reach out to either Kevin or I, and we will put you in touch with the information or the folks who can get it to you. Thanks again, and let's pursue those resources and get some mitigation on the ground.